Welcome to today's EMS Friday virtual news briefing, which is the third in a series we are presenting in partnership with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, a national philanthropy dedicated to promoting health equity. I'm Sunita Sarabji, Ethnic Media Services Health Editor, and your moderator today. So, just for background, RWJF supported the first National Expo of Ethnic Media in New York City way back in 2005. And it's an honor to help expand its communications outreach to the ethnic media sector. So, we turn our attention this week to state ballot measures, which are a powerful way for voters to participate directly in policymaking at the state level. These include measures that address a variety of health concerns, from abortion rights and paid sick leave to minimum wage and clean water access. Efforts to restrict ballot measures access are increasing at the same time that advances for health equity are passing at the ballot box. 75 bills were introduced in the state legislatures in 2023 to change the rules and make the ballot measure process harder for voters to use to make progress on the issues they care about. So far in 2024, there have been 103 bills attacking the ballot measure process, and we expect more bills to come in the next year. So speakers today will discuss ballot measures and how to protect this vital form of direct democracy. They will also share the direct impact of ballot measures. We welcome our esteemed panel. Avanel Joseph, she is the Interim Executive Vice President at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Chris Melody Fields Figueredo, Executive Director of the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center Foundation, and Richard Von Glan, Political Director at Missouri Jobs with Justice. So we ask our speakers to speak slowly for our interpreters in Spanish, Mandarin, and Korean. We ask reporters to enter questions in the chat. Our speakers are also encouraged to answer questions in the chat box throughout the conference. We will send a video of today's briefing along with expanded bios for each speaker later today. We will also send video excerpts of the presentations early next week. And we encourage reporters and speakers to share these on their social media channels to give a greater viewership to our briefings. So we begin with Avanel Joseph, who will present an overview of the ballot measure process and how it has been successfully used to promote and protect health equity, including some of the downstream drivers of good health. Welcome, Avanel.
Thank you so much, Sunita, and thank you for helping to pull together this briefing. I'm really thrilled to join you all here today and look forward to engaging with you on a topic that is a key priority for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Our organization, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, is committed to policies that have the power to advance fairness in health outcomes for everyone, regardless of race, gender, class, or other identifying characteristics. So we can make progress towards creating a thriving society where health is not a privilege for some, but a right for all. The connection between access to ballot measures and ensuring fairness in health outcomes for all communities might seem unclear. But we believe that a dedicated focus on ballot measures as a tool to put better and fairer policies in place is crucial to our success as a health-focused funder. Ballot measures are a form of direct democracy. They give voters the ability to make meaningful change on issues that they care about. And often this happens when those issues are not being addressed in their state houses, in their state legislatures. Ballot measures can be transformative for people's health and well-being, providing opportunities for communities who have been impacted by racism or other forms of structural oppression to have a direct say on policies that matter the most to them. Over the past 5+ years, ballot measures have been crucial in advancing policies like Medicaid expansion, minimum wage increases, abortion access, and paid leave. In fact, a recent study by Health Affairs found that of the ballot initiatives that passed nationwide between 2014 and 2023, more than 63% were related to health. Building a future where good health is within reach for everyone, no matter their race, gender, or zip code, means that we must protect and invest in the ballot measure process. As we at RWJF work to ensure that everyone has a fair and just opportunity to reach their best health and well-being, we want the people and communities facing the greatest challenges to have a say on the issues that matter most to them. We want communities to create and implement solutions, whether related to housing security, financial stability, civil rights protections, or other health interventions. Policymakers, advocates, and researchers who are focused on health outcomes need to be aware of the powerful role and opportunity that state ballot initiatives hold for their work. In this recent election, ballot measures proved to be a powerful way for voters to make decisions to improve their health. For example, voters in 7 states passed ballot measures that guarantee abortion rights in their state constitutions. Voters in Missouri, Nebraska, and Alaska approved paid sick leave for their workers. And Missouri, who's on the call today, will talk more about some of the ballot measures that were passed, including that ballot measure to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Voters showed that they want a direct say at the ballot box this past election cycle, too. Efforts to restrict ballot measure process failed in both Arizona and North Dakota. While there is a lot of uncertainty about our political system, one thing that we know for sure is ballot measures are one of the parts of our system that is working. Ballot measures and direct democracy cut across political party lines. Voters were able to advance policies that align with their values, regardless of party identity, in blue states and red states, and those very rare purple states. At the same time, threats to the ballot measure process are increasing. Our partners at the BISC Foundation track threats to the process, and their analysis found that in 2024 alone, there were 103 bills attacking the ballot measure process, and we expect that there will be even more in 2025. The truth is that it's no coincidence that efforts to restrict ballot measure access are increasing at the same time that advances for fairer and a more just America, policies like paid leave, minimum wage, and abortion access, are passing at the ballot box. Ultimately, efforts to restrict ballot measures are meant to restrict our country's progress towards a country where health is a right for all and not just reserved as a privilege for some. Florida is a prime example of what happens when we make it harder to pass ballot measures. Because of laws requiring a 60% threshold, Florida's abortion access measure failed, even though more than the majority, 57% of the electorate, had a vote in favor of the measure. And there have been legislative efforts over the last few years to increase this threshold even further, to as high as 67%. That is why we must act now to protect the ballot measure process as a vital pathway toward health for all, no matter what the political environment might be. We at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation are funding and making investments in 4 strategies to protect access to the ballot measure process. These strategies include supporting and bringing together national and state organizations, such as those on the call today, who are working to defend the ballot measure process through non-lobbying advocacy, mobilization, public education, legal efforts, and research. We're also building awareness of the connection between ballot measure process and health and well-being. Third, we're exploring opportunities to proactively expand access to the ballot measure process in more states. And we're engaging new philanthropic partners by sharing insights into how philanthropy can invest in this work and why health-focused funders in particular must see direct democracy as a critical aspect of their success. Our partners at the national and state level are doing the on-the-ground work to make ballot measure access a reality for all communities. And we could not be more excited about what is to come with their work. Some of those partners include Missouri Jobs with Justice and the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center Foundation, both of whom join us on this call today. There is so much more to say about this work, but I really want to make sure we have enough time to get to the reporters' questions. And I also want to give our partners on the call an opportunity to share more about their incredible work in this space. So thank you very much for this time.
Avenel, there are a number of questions for you, but we'll start with Henrietta Burrows. Henrietta, please ask your question.
Thanks so much, Sunita. What are the reasons given for those who'd like to restrict ballot measures? I mean, you have to have a certain number of signatures on a petition, don't you, to put a ballot measure on the ballot? So what are the obstructions, reasons given?
Yeah. I would invite Chris for this question. I'm not sure any of the reasons given are ones that feel very valid on their face. Often these changes are being made because state legislators, those who have been elected into office, don't want the power to be taken away from them to make change. They also say that it might protect the state from being influenced by outside politics or outside money. That's often a reason that's given, although we see that that's not really what's playing out in many states, where on-the-ground organizations and communities are really coming together to collect the signatures and to advance policies that they most care about.
Thank you. Which states do not allow ballot measures? Another question from reporters.
Oh, that's one I'm going to have to put in the chat. Unless
Okay.
Chris, you know unless you know that off the top of your head.
Maybe what will be helpful, and I'll drop it in the chat, is we have a ballot measure hub on the BISC website, and also sort of an FAQ section that has a chart of the states that do have it. And so then you can make the assumption everywhere else. And we're talking very specifically about the citizen-led process at a statewide level. Some, for example, maybe if you're in Alabama, you don't have the citizen-led process statewide, but you may be able to do it at the municipal or county level in some of these states. And then all states in the United States, their state legislatures can refer something to the ballot. It's called a legislatively referred constitutional amendment. Which we are actually seeing happen more and more in states that don't have the citizen-led process. One specific example that, BISC, we helped our partners in Kentucky defeat a school voucher ballot measure that was referred by the state legislature. So I'll drop in the ballot measure hub, and Richard, maybe you can give a little more context of why, as someone who fights it every legislative cycle in Missouri.
Yeah, we have a few more questions for Avenel, though. So we'll do those. Orhan Akord, please ask your question.
Thank you, Sunita. So question is, we are talking about restriction. So who benefits from this restriction of ballot?
I think we would argue that no one is benefiting from restricting ballot measure access. They are a form of direct democracy. They allow voters to craft and weigh in on the issues that matter to them the most, especially when their state elected officials are not addressing that issue, or if they're in direct opposition to the thing that the community wants, often because they elected officials are more likely to further corporate or partisan interests than those of the communities that they represent. Um, Often, when we are seeing efforts to restrict ballot measures, those efforts are coming from special interest groups or from various partisan interests who are
Mhm.
driving those efforts to restrict the ballot measures. An example of that is what happened in Florida, where they raised the threshold for the passage of ballots to 60%. And that meant that even though 57% of Floridians voted to protect abortion access in the state, an overwhelming majority, it still was not able to pass the ballot measure and be enacted into state law. So it's no coincidence that efforts to restrict ballot measure access are increasing at the same time that you're seeing efforts like paid leave, minimum wage, and other policies that are passing at the ballot box. Often those sorts of policies, things like paid leave or minimum wage, are directly beneficial to an average person, but might not be equally beneficial to corporate interests. So that's what I would say in response to that question.
All right. Well, we have one final question from, there are a number of questions, but we'll take one final question from Nancy Tran. Nancy, please ask your question. And reporters, please mute yourselves if you are not asking a question. Thank you.
Hello.
Nancy?
Yeah. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. My question is that people who restrict this measure to voters, are they normally Republican? Are they in the red states? The special interest group people are just influence on these politicians, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Sure. I mean, I would say that restricting ballot measure access is one that allows partisan and ideologic interests to benefit. That's currently the context that you see is where you have a government trifecta of some sort. Ballots are a wonderful tool for communities to advance policies that trifecta might be in opposition to. I don't have the map in front of me, so I can't, maybe Chris can speak to this too, about whether we're seeing this more in states that are Republican-led. I think that is the case, but I want to make sure that I'm not speaking out of expertise. So, okay, I'm seeing Chris giving me a thumbs up. So yes, we are seeing that states that are restricting access to the ballot process, states that want to silence direct democracy or silence communities, are typically happening in states that are run by Republicans, particularly in the state house.
Avenel, thank you. There are a few questions that we didn't get to. If you would answer them in the chat, that would be terrific. We're going to move on to Richard Von Glan, who will discuss how Missouri Jobs with Justice has successfully used ballot measures to protect Medicaid and to increase the state's minimum wage. Among other initiatives, the organization has successfully implemented with ballot measures. So reporters, please keep your questions coming for all our speakers today. And Richard, welcome. Please begin.
Thank you, Sunita. Again, my name is Richard Von Glan. I use the he, him pronouns. I have worked at Missouri Jobs with Justice for the last 12 years. In my time there, we have raised the minimum wage originally once, but now 2.5 weeks ago, now twice in my time there, as well as protected collective bargaining rights for workers, allowed workers to organize into unions, and expanded Medicaid to over 250,000 Missourians to help provide health care to them. Um, so I believe very strongly in the ballot measure process. It is a tool that has existed in Missouri for over 100 years. So I like to say probably everybody in Missouri, or just about everybody in Missouri, has always had this right. And it serves as an important check on our legislature if the legislature is not meeting the needs of the people. There have been years where ballot initiatives have not been very common, and then there have been years where ballot initiatives have been very common. And I think that reflects on whether the legislature is meeting the needs of our community. Most recently, this last year, I served as the campaign manager for Missourians for Healthy Families and Fair Wages, which was the ballot initiative that is increasing Missouri's minimum wage to $15 by 2026 and allowing all workers to earn paid sick leave to care for themselves or their families or loved ones when they need it. As many as 1 in 3 Missourians did not have access to any paid time off before the passage of this initiative, which passed with about 58% on November 5th. I want to take a step back and quote one of the leaders of this campaign, a man named Terrence Wise, who'd worked in the fast food industry in Kansas City for over a decade and has been a leader in the Fight for 15 and the Missouri Workers Center, one of the organizations that helped lead this campaign. And when we turned in signatures to put this issue on the ballot in May, he said, we are all worthy of having what we need to survive, but not just to survive, but to thrive as well. And Terrence said this standing next to his 2 daughters that are grown now, but who I knew as younger children. And it really struck me that this is what we have been all about in Missouri. We know, as Avenal mentioned, some of the social determinants of health, some of the environmental things that can most impact your ability not just to survive, but to thrive, or whether or not you can live in a condition of economic stability, and whether or not you can have access to health insurance. And I don't just mean, or access to health care. And in that, I don't just mean health insurance, but the actual ability to use that insurance and take the time that you need to take care of your family. And in Missouri, currently a full-time minimum wage worker makes less than $500 a week before taxes. That is someone who is working 40 hours a week. According to the MIT living wage calculator, that is not a living wage in any county in the state of Missouri. So what that means is that hardworking people are not economically stable. They are having to cut corners. They are having to wonder how they will meet their expenses at the end of the month. What we also knew to be true is that as many as 1 in 3 Missourians lacked access to a single minute of paid time off. And if you are already living check to check, the idea of taking an unpaid day in order to care for your health or your loved one's health is an impossible choice, because it means not being able to afford your groceries at the end of the month or an electric bill. I remember one of the leaders of this campaign, a woman named Fran Marion from Kansas City, told a heartbreaking story about when her child was sick and was staying home from school, and she had to leave that child to go to work to put, um, to put to earn money to put food in the pantry and in the refrigerator, and how that her child asked her, "Mom, why won't you stay with me and take care of me?" And the emotional impact for a child of feeling like their parent will not be there for them in a time of need, as well as the emotional impact on Fran and her saying that she felt like a failure as a mother and as a parent, um, just really hurts my heart. And no one should have to make those choices. Um, the other thing that we know is the people that have to make those choices are disproportionately people of color and women. Both the people that I've talked about are people of color, and Fran is a mother, while Terrence is a man. But we know that there have long been gaps in wages um, that are based on race and ethnicity and gender. That Latinas, I believe I looked this up before the call, and it said a Latina makes 51.9 cents on the dollar compared to a white man in a similar job. So we know when we are advancing policies like Proposition A in Missouri, we are doing right by all families, but we're also proud to be able to close some of the racial and gender gaps that have long been part of the structure of the United States economy and shouldn't be. Um, and so we do this work with that focus as well. Um, I think that's about the amount of time. I'm trying to keep myself to 8 minutes here. I will just close in saying that this campaign was done by the people of Missouri. Nearly 900 volunteers in Missouri gathered over 210,000 signatures to put this on the ballot. In the final 10 days of the election, we had over 1,500 volunteers go knock on doors, knock over 150,000 doors to make sure Missourians knew what was on our ballot and were prepared to pass it. So we're very excited about being a bright spot in the election for that. And our movement was really powered by Terrence and Fran and so many of the hardworking people of this country that deserve better than what our economy and sadly what some of our elected officials have been offering them.
Richard, thank you. That was so insightful. I wanted to ask, first of all, you had talked about, this impacting disproportionately people of color and women. And I wonder if you have data on how many people in Missouri lack access to healthcare or lack a lower level of access to healthcare. The cost of it is too high for them to be able to afford things like copays and deductibles.
Yeah, what we know is that as many as 1 in 3 Missourians, working Missourians, about 730,000, lack access to any guaranteed paid time off. Um, so, while this policy didn't focus on health insurance as much, what it focuses, I think, is part of the question about access to health care. If you have health insurance, but you can't afford to take a day away from work, that insurance isn't worth anything to you because you can't actually use it. In 2020, we used the ballot initiative process to expand Medicaid. That was about expanding who has access to insurance. This felt like a very natural follow-up to make sure that people have the time to take themselves to the doctor or a family member to the doctor.
And without naming names, could you talk about some of the opponents to paid sick leave?
Yeah, I mean, sadly, I think there are some in the business community, and I don't want to say all, we had over 500 primarily small businesses, local businesses support this initiative because they know that workers are really what drive economic growth. When workers are treated fairly, they can be more productive at work, they can be safer at work, and they turn around and they spend their income back in our local economies. That is really how we believe the economy works. We think a lot of workers and a lot of primarily small businesses think that way. Sadly, there are some multinational, larger corporations who believe in a different worldview, who believe that they should be able to squeeze as much profit out of any individual worker as is possible. And you see these workplaces that have high turnover, that have high degrees of workplace injury and the spread of disease in our workplaces. And um, I think those are exploitive businesses. And, policies like what we passed in Missouri are very important to set up a set of guardrails around our economy that can reflect our community's values and make sure that workers aren't exploited by some. So I do think there are some that place profit above above people or care for the environment or anything else. I want to be clear, I don't think that's all business owners, but I do think it's some, and that's why guardrails are important.
Thank you. There are two more excellent questions for you. Has the ballot measure become synonymous with the Democratic Party? Or you were talking about this a little bit, but are there measures that you have successfully put through that draw bipartisan support?
I mean, Donald Trump won Missouri by, I think, 18 points, and we won it by about 16 points.
Wow.
Some of the early analysis in that we've done, particularly of rural counties in Missouri, is that as many as 1 in 4 workers in rural counties in Missouri, as 1 in 4 voters, voted both for Donald Trump and Proposition A. I think and that way, ballot initiatives are not synonymous with one political party or the other. What ballot initiatives are really synonymous with is the needs and experiences of workers in our community. All of the commercials, any of the mail, the pieces that we did about explaining our initiative featured workers like Terrence or Fran or others telling their story of their real lived experiences in Missouri's economy. And I think that's why issues like that can cut across maybe partisan lanes because it's about how we are experiencing our lives and people can really see community and empathy in that.
Final question before we go to Chris. Can your state legislature cancel out the minimum wage or paid sick leave or other measures that you've successfully implemented through the ballot measure process?
Yeah, our ballot initiative is a statutory measure. It is a law, so that means it could be changed by the legislature. We think when something passes with a 16% majority, even our opponents in the business community have said, when something passes overwhelmingly like that, it would be hard for a legislator to overturn the will of the people. But we do recognize, sadly, I think in some strain of our politics, there is a very anti-democratic thread or element in our politics right now. And so we do expect to see some of those calls, and we will be mobilizing our workers and our community allies and our supporters to defend this win from any attacks that might come.
Thank you, Richard. And before we go to Chris, Renee Barbie had a point. Renee, please make your comments and please be brief.
Okay, let me find out okay. In the city of Pomona, we did a ballot measure. Why? We didn't do it. Somebody else up north did it, and a local organization here um, got together with them up north and put tons of money into it, and it passed, and it's taking 10% out of our city budget in the next 5 years. What I'm trying to find out is how let's see. It if any of you can provide me with an answer as to how we can recall this measure and get it removed, if possible, from ruining our city, I greatly appreciate it. Again, it was Measure Y for Pomona, California.
You're talking about the recall of ballot measures.
Right.
Does anybody want to take that question before we move on to Chris?
I don't know the history of that in any way, but I mean, statutory initiatives can be used to, promote or change initiatives in different ways. What I do know is a lot of times we see initiatives that are the result of failures of our elected officials to really meet the needs of a community. And if we have more responsive elected officials, I actually think ballot initiatives will not be as common. When we see more ballot initiatives happening, it is because our politics are broken and are not meeting the needs of our communities.
Thank you, Richard. Our final speaker today is Chris Melody Fields Figueredo, who will discuss why ballot measures may be in jeopardy in many states. Chris will also discuss how to protect this critical tool of democracy. Chris, welcome.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Chris Melody Fields Figueredo, she, her, ella work for me as pronouns. On second reference, Fields is fine. And it's a great pleasure to be a part of this because I'm bilingual. I grew up with English and Spanish in my household, and Spanish was actually my first language. So thank you for the opportunity to be in community with reporters who are providing really important services and language services to your communities. We speak Spanish mostly I mostly speak Spanish with my mom, and served as a translator for her I still do in my life. So providing those in-language services is just so vitally important. So I have deep appreciation. So BISC, the Ballot Initiative Strategy, and then our sister organization, our C3 BISC Foundation, is at its core, sometimes I like to think of us as special teams. We help amazing leaders like Richard, although Richard teaches us more often than not, but other amazing leaders and organizations across the country in the United States to think about how we use ballot measures or direct democracy to what Richard has so beautifully illustrated, directly impact people's lives and give them the opportunity to be their own agents in our democracy, to change the material conditions of their lives, whether it's reproductive rights, whether it's minimum wage, whether it's fair redistricting, whether it's Medicaid expansion. That is what we are set here to do, is to provide our partners with the research, the training, just getting on a phone call, or Richard and I text often, and just be sort of, our partners, to make sure that we can help them turn the dreams that they are trying to create for their communities into a reality. We have actually, our partners have been successful for several years on winning progressive policy at the ballot when we put these issues in front of voters, regardless of party affiliation. We've been successful, and because of that success, we are facing a significant pushback, not only through state legislatures, but also actors who are filing legal cases in the courts to try to undermine the will of the people. And, Avinal mentioned two really important victories that we had this year to protect direct democracy in the United States, in Arizona and North Dakota. almost every single time when state legislators have put ballot measures about ballot measures before voters to change the process and make it more difficult for everyday people to put issues on the ballot. And it's already a very hard process to put issues on the ballot. There's a lot of steps that people have to go through to get the language approved, to go into their communities and get those signatures, to verify those signatures. Like there's a very big process to get those issues onto the ballot. And so we have seen primarily state legislators be hostile towards the progress that we are making. And so we were able to successfully work with our partners in North Dakota and Arizona to defeat ballot measures that would have made it increasingly expensive and difficult for people to put issues on the ballot. Because we were successful this year, and I've been calling them glimmers on a number of issues related to health, especially around abortion access. We expect that there are going to be major challenges around implementation of those ballot measures. Missouri is living under a total abortion ban, and implementation is going to be very critical in the next thing. It goes to effect in 30 days, right, Richard? The successful Amendment 3. That doesn't mean in 30 days those abortion clinics overnight are going to open back up. We're going to have to make sure that there are the resources in those in Missouri and other states like Arizona to reopen those clinics and make sure also the doctors have the ability to perform the services that they are medically obligated to do. So it doesn't just that the work is over. We actually really important work to do in the next several months to make sure that these successful health-related ballot measures are implemented in the way that they were intended. We also face major attacks often during the legislative process, where we see bills introduced to change the process in some way. So raising the threshold of how to pass, how the percentage of what you need to pass a ballot measure is one of the things that we see often. I think we can, if the past is present, we can make an assumption in the 2025 state legislature, we will see bills around raising the threshold to supermajorities like Florida because they were successful in defeating the abortion ballot measure in Florida because of that threshold. We are likely to see that introduced in other state legislatures. Other things that we've seen is raising the threshold to gather signatures or have very specific geographic distribution requirements. And why that's important is if you are in St. Louis, Richard, right? The amount of signatures you can I got to go back to Texas, my home state, because I know the cities in Texas better than I do in Missouri, but where a Dallas we don't have it in Texas for the record, but for Dallas and for Prairie View, which is a very rural community in Texas, the amount of people that can get signatures is vastly different. And so when you have these restrictions, it makes it almost impossible to gather those signatures. It also makes it way more expensive. And so grassroots base building organizations like Missouri Jobs with Justice, they don't have volumes of money at their disposal. And so when we raise those thresholds, it actually makes it difficult for community-driven organizations to put those issues that are so important on the ballot. So one of the other things that we expect that happened this year that was successful in states like Ohio and Florida that we expect will be used again, especially as groups like Missouri for Jobs with Justice will begin to think about what they want to put on the ballot in 2026 is one of the reasons issue 1 failed in Ohio was because of the ballot title language. It really confused voters. And it unfortunately did not make the 50% threshold to have fair redistricting in Ohio. We expect to see that happen across the country. Also, we saw this election cycle, state government use taxpayer funds to defeat ballot measures like they did in Florida, actually send police to people's homes who signed petitions. They did this in Florida. We expect to see that happen in other states as well. And then the final thing that is a threat to direct democracy is mis and disinformation, which is a threat to our democracy in the United States across the board. Where many of the ballot measures that we were supporting our partners to win at the ballot, mis and disinformation played a huge role that confused voters, and where they thought they might have been voting yes for something like reproductive freedom, they actually or voting no. It really confused them, and so that is what we saw happen in a number of states. So, for us at BISC and working with our amazing state leaders across the country, we see all of these as anti-democratic attacks. And it is incredibly important that we do the work in the next coming months to connect the dots for voters. The sort of example that I've been using is you can't eat democracy. And so we can talk about threats to our democracy, but if we can't actually connect the dots for people and show how what happened in Missouri with Proposition A and paid leave and minimum wage is directly connected to our democracy, then we aren't going to have the same soldiers right out in the field with us to protect and defend our democracy. And, we say our work doesn't start or stop on election day. That's just one stop in our democracy journey. And it is going to be critically important that we talk to voters and get them engaged in the state legislative process and make sure that they understand what's happening around implementation. And we also have the opportunity to sort of bridge this gap where in Missouri, 500,000 people may have voted for Donald Trump and also Proposition A. And I know y'all are already going back into the field to understand why that happened. And that I think is so important for us to approach it from a place of curiosity and not partisanship, and really have really honest conversations with people. So we activate them to be defenders of our democracy.
You, Chris. There are a number of questions for you, but several people asked the same question, which is, could you very briefly explain the ballot measure process? How do you get a measure on the ballot? I know this is a complicated question. If you could give it a minute, that would be terrific.
The simplest way, and why I'm smiling, is it is different in every single state, right, but it's the simplest. In most states, you are going to have to get some kind of language saying this proposition or amendment or initiative will do this thing. Whoever has the governing authority in that state will go through a process to approve it. Then if that gets approved, then people will go into the field and collect signatures to get that issue onto the ballot. Once that happens, every state has a different number of signatures that you have to gather. We recommend people gather at least double the amount because of that. The next step will be that verification process to make sure those the petition signers are who they are. And then once that happens, once the ballot measure qualifies, then we begin sort of that voter education process to make sure people understand what a vote yes or vote no means. So that's the easiest easiest way to explain it. It's a little different in every state, but that's sort of the core.
Great. And to follow up, Henrietta has a question. Henrietta Burrows has a question for you. Henrietta, please ask your question, your first question.
Thanks, Sunita. You mentioned that it was difficult getting measures on the ballot in Texas. Why? Is it the distance between? Well, I'll just leave it with the question.
Oh, I was using my home state as an example mostly because I couldn't think of a rural city in Missouri off the top of my head. But in my home state of Texas, we do not have the statewide citizen-led process. We can do it at the municipal level or the county level. What the challenge in Texas right now is preemption, which means many local governments cannot change some laws or may try to change it because the state government, whoever is in control there, may preemptively stop anything that a local community might do. So there might be local communities in Texas that want to become sanctuary cities because of Texas's preemption laws. Many may not be able to.
So we go to our final round of questions for all speakers. Here's a terrific question. If the federal safety net process gets cut by the Trump administration in the name of, quote, efficiency, can ballot measures be effective countermeasures, since we're talking about federal dollars here? Avenel, do you want to take this question?
Sure. So as Chris just sort of described, ballot measures aren't an easy thing to do, right? It takes a lot of effort to get something on a ballot measure. So it's not really great as a defense mechanism for federal policy. And for the particular question, one that involves federally funded safety net programs, I'm thinking in my head things like the federal match for Medicaid expansion or food benefits, for example. There's not really anything that can happen in state law that would affect the federal dollars. You could have a ballot measure that would increase state dollars that would go to that program to serve as sort of a backstop for what's the decrease in federal money that's coming to the state. But again, that's not something that can be rapidly done or should be relied on as a sole defense mechanism for those larger federal changes. Chris, please add.
Yeah. Please weigh in, Chris and Richard.
I mean, Avenel, you said it right. I mean, there are things that we could do for state level funds, but federal law is still federal law. And so often, and which Robert Wood Johnson has been supportive of, revenue or tax measures are often really hard to pass at the ballot because there's been a narrative around taxes and taxation, but that doesn't mean all hope is lost. There's actually a lot of organizations that are trying to help people better understand the importance of taxes. And what the social safety nets they often will can provide. But if something is done, generally something is done federally, that is the law of the land, and then there might be other avenues through state law that we can try.
Fantastic, thank you. So I have a question now for all of you. Voters tend to vote no when they don't understand a ballot measure. And we know in this last election cycle, a lot of people voted for the top of the ticket and did not look at down the ticket at ballot measures. They didn't vote on ballot measures. And there's very little outreach to the communities that we cover in terms of ballot measures and propositions. So how do we effectively, how do proponents and opponents of these measures effectively engage with our communities to get them to vote or not vote on the things that we care about? Who would like, Richard, why don't you start with a good example of the outreach that you did with paid sick leave?
Yeah. So our coalition behind this included almost 140 community organizations, groups like the associations of pediatricians, different churches, women's organizations, child welfare organizations. So we really try to use organizations that are embedded in the community to go out and talk to people and know about this. Because in Missouri, we also voted on our judges. And I mean, we had 25 judges to work through before we get to the ballot initiatives. And that can be very hard for people. But we actually have not seen as much drop off about campaigns. And I think when campaigns are really driven by community organizations and by members of the community, you don't see that as much. There can be ballot initiatives that, somebody hires a vendor to gather signatures and maybe makes one slick television commercial, but don't really involve the community. That's, I think, where you see drop off on these issues because the issues don't resonate with the community necessarily and aren't driven by the community. But for things like ours, we did not have a lot of drop off, and we saw our measure gather more votes than Josh Hawley, who was elected as a U.S. senator. So we feel very good about that, knowing that many Missourians support it.
Thank you. Avenel and Chris, I'd like you to respond to this question. If you could please, how can proponents and opponents engage effectively with communities of color, such as the ones we cover? Avenel?
Well, I'd give that to Chris first. I think she'll
Okay, all right. Fair. Chris.
So that is our whole part of our whole theory of change. At BISC is the communities most impacted by policy are often Black, Brown, Indigenous communities, low-income communities, those who have been marginalized. So we think it's so critically important that they are driving these ballot measures, and we build coalitions like they have done in Missouri that include organizations that are going to go out into communities, provide in-language services. Leaders United, Lucha in Arizona is one of the organizations that we work with in Arizona. They provide English and language and Spanish language services. They're very deeply connected to the Latin community in Arizona. So for us, it's very critical that those communities are centered and driving these ballot measures because we understand our communities the best. I think there's also a really important role that ethnic media plays and the partnerships that we have with ethnic media to make sure that we're thinking about how we outreach to those communities and the way that we receive information, whether it's radio, whether it's small community newspapers, whether it's WhatsApp. It's so critically important that we are connected to ethnic media to ensure that we are disseminating information across communities. And then I just want to sort of lift up what Richard said is actually the reality is we see more drop off at the top versus on down ballot measures specifically. Actually, in many states, ballot measures were overperform state elected officials. The Amendment 4, which was the reproductive freedom ballot measure in Florida, which in any other state, 57% would be a significant majority and they would have been successful. They were able to get 1 million more votes than Ron DeSantis. So this is often what we see happen in states because people look at these issues and they're like, yeah, I'm struggling to make ends meet. I want to raise the minimum wage. Like that's a no-brainer for them. They aren't seeing a party D or an R next to that issue, and so they will often be more motivated to vote for those issues than they might be for candidates. And I think that speaks to the distrust we have right now in the United States with institutions and government. And I think there's an important bridge that ballot measures can play to restore that trust. Because what we have seen at BISC from our own research is people trust themselves and they trust their communities. And so, how can ballot measures be a vehicle for people to restore trust in some of our democratic institutions?
Thank you. Havnel, final remarks from you?
Well, I could not say it better than what Chris just said. I think, just finally, there was also a question in the chat about what we're expecting in terms of further restrictions to ballot measures. And just to answer that briefly, I'll say there's going to be all sorts of creative ways that state legislatures will try to make ballots less likely of a thing that could happen. Anything from raising the threshold to making very confusing language a part of sort of how ballots make it onto the actual thing that a person votes on. So all to say that whenever there is progress, whenever we see the things that Chris is mentioning, when you see community voice really being heard and enacted on, there's going to be backlash to that, and they will get very creative in what that backlash looks like. I think just finally, I'd say, as we've heard today, ballot measures can drastically and rapidly improve the health and well-being for communities. And we've also heard very clearly voters want to have a direct say at the ballot box. Access to ballot measures are an essential tool to ensure that everyone in this country, no matter where they live, no matter who they are, no matter how much money they make, has a fair and just opportunity to thrive. The ballot measure process can serve as a critical and sometimes the only viable pathway to advance policies that improve community health and well-being in many communities and many states across the country, no matter what that political environment might be for the next 4 years and way beyond that. So it's really very crucial for us to defend against efforts to limit or roll back citizen-initiated ballot measures. The foundation, RWJF, is listening to, we're partnering with, and we're speaking alongside our partners like Chris and like Richard to really maintain this as a key tool of our democracy. And we are committed to this work and to creating a future that all of our children and our grandchildren deserve.
Excellent closing remarks. Thank you to all of our speakers and to our reporters for joining us today. And just to note, we will not have a briefing next Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, to give you guys a chance to recover from turkey, overeating turkey. And we'll see you on the following Friday.